Welcome to Why Knowledge Matters.
Conflict is one of the most natural things about our human existence, because part of what makes us special as human beings is that we have independent ways of looking at things and of interpreting our experience. And for any two individuals to come together, it's quite natural that there's going to be some kind of a clash because we simply see things differently. So it's natural. The other thing is that part of what makes us special as individuals is that we have this fascination with conflict. And part of that is that we really like drama. We like to be stimulated. We like to be excited. And there are a few things that excite us more than conflict. So our games, our novels, our television shows, our movies, everything has to do with conflict. And that's what makes it interesting. And that's what hooks us, if you like. So if we start by saying conflict is something really natural about about us as human beings, we can then move to say, okay, what are the harmful sides of conflict? How does it become destructive? And how does it cause some deep hurts? So for anybody, just take a step back and think about what have been the most painful aspects of your life. And chances are the most painful things that we've experienced have had to do with conflict. So conflict, even though it's natural, it can lead us down a path that leads to violence, that leads to deep hurt, that builds within us reservoirs of recollection, emotional memories that come back of times when we have been deeply hurt. We can then say, oh, but is that all there is to it? And then we start to think, some of the biggest positive developments among human beings has been the result of conflict. So conflict can lead to creativity. And when we think about some of the most positive experiences we've had, those have to do with the reconciliation after a conflict. When somebody has hurt us and something has happened and all of a sudden the walls between us come down and we reestablish connection and reestablish the possibility of living fully with somebody else. The other thing about conflict is if we harness it right and if we reflect on what's going on in during our conflicts, the conflict itself can lead to much deeper self-awareness. We find out a lot of things about ourselves if we're open to doing this through what happens in conflict. So for all those reasons, it's kind of exciting to be studying about what constitutes conflict, what drives people, and so on. That is a question that comes close to my heart, and it relates to this matter of our passion coming out of what we experience. And in my case, there was something that happened that I can point to that led to this deep desire to study, and that was I was living in Thompson, Manitoba, way up north in Thompson, and we had a little peace group there, and we brought in this economist from Winnipeg. This was back in the 1980s, and there had just been a big famine in Ethiopia. And he told us about how food was used as a weapon in this famine. So thousands of people died because food was deliberately withheld from them. And something just snapped inside of me. I thought, how on earth could people do that? To have so many innocent people, children, women, men, people who were poor, so many people die through a deliberate withholding of food just because people were passionate about their particular group, their particular ideology, wanting to win. For whatever reason, they did this. So that made me want to study conflict. And so in 1991, I started my PhD, and I wanted to study deep-rooted conflict, which drives people to do violent things and commit the worst atrocities. And so when we think about the worst atrocities, this leads us into the realm of genocide and mass violence and command rape, where soldiers are commanded to rape women repeatedly. So these are absolutely horrendous aspects of our humanity. But I wanted to get under the skins of people and to their hearts to say, what is it that prompts them to want to do this? And then as I started studying, I started to realize that conflict is really a transdisciplinary subject. That means it can't be pinned down to one discipline, and it's not even interdisciplinary with disciplines working together. It just goes over and above any particular discipline. So I drew on stuff from social psychology, political psychology, anthropology, political science, international relations, and then I started to realize, hey, what's going on here is about emotions. People get into this because they're deeply emotionally involved in this. So I need to understand more about emotions. So that took me into neurobiology and the biology of emotions, and then when we think about how do people cope when they're undergoing the worst of suffering, where do they get the strength? And that leads then into the whole area of spirituality, which is another whole topic. But my interest in spirituality then was one of these things that spun out of my wanting to see not only why do people engage in conflict, but how do they manage and how do they get a certain kind of resilience and a chance to move ahead. I guess when you go back to what was driving me and my passion, and you want to say, how and why do people engage in conflict? That can really contribute to what are the institutions, the mechanisms, the skills, the processes that can be used to somehow come to terms with conflict. And there has been a growing awareness that we can't just pretend that conflict is going to go away, or we can't just pretend that by ignoring it, it'll somehow clear itself up. But if we understand how it works, then we can use the skills and the understandings to, for individuals who are in conflict, to understand what's going on so they can work constructively with their situation. But we can also have institutions that will somehow or other work with the conflict in a way that's going to lead to positive results. And so if you look at a history of, say, international institutions, the United Nations can be seen as an institution that is there primarily to turn violent conflict into something that we talk about. And by talking about it, we find a way to get through it without resorting to committing atrocities. At a personal level, mediation, interpersonal mediation, is a process that can be used for two individuals to work things through in a safe environment with a third party. So, and at an intrapersonal level, when we try to understand ourselves, it really, really matters if you can figure it out. So I'll give you an example. One of the key things that I worked on is something called human identity needs. And this comes out of and I'm working on the giants of the past, so to speak. So one of the giants in the field of conflict resolution is John W. Burton, who had his whole understanding of conflict changed radically in the 1970s when he heard about deep-rooted conflict and human identity needs. So the way he put it is, when the non-negotiable, non-material identity needs are threatened, people will fight. So that means when there's something within us that we say, this is right at the core of who I am, this is the most important thing to me, these are values that I believe to my core. And if somebody threatens these, then I'm going to have an emotional reaction. And in the case of some people, that emotional reaction then leads to fighting. And so this is where doing academic work makes a difference, because what I did then is I looked at all the literature on human identity needs, and I found 24 that were talked about. And I figured, oh, this isn't really practical to talk about 24 different needs. Like, it just gets a little too complicated. So I thought, okay, how can I reduce this down to something that's workable? And so I came up with the needs of meaning, which includes a sense of justice. So if you think about it, most of the time when people get really, really upset, it's because they say, this is not fair, this is unjust, this goes against my belief system. And right now, as you think about all these people who are loyal to Trump and are ready to be violent on his behalf, they have a meaning system which they've committed to that's been shaped by Trump. And when there's a threat to this, they feel they have to fight for it. Now, it's one thing to say, oh yeah, we can understand those people out there, but what about ourselves? So I've been in circumstances where there have been conflicts within organizations where I worked, and I've had to leave because of that, which has been really, really painful to me. Like, if you live in an organization where you work in your field and your identity gets shaped by it, you start to say, I get a sense of meaning out of being here. And so my ability to cope and get beyond some very difficult situations has been to use these identity needs to say, why is it that I feel so strongly about this? Why does it hurt me so much? And then I realize, I let my identity need satisfiers be wrapped up in this institution. Then I can take a step back and say, is that who I really am? And I can say, no, I'm more than just what I was doing in this institution. So meaning becomes the first one. Then connectedness. We have a need to be bonded to other people. We have a need to feel we belong. And again, looking at what's happening to the supporters of Trump right now, they have a tremendous sense of connectedness with one another. They have a sense of solidarity and a sense of connectedness with Trump, for that matter. And so this becomes woven into the core of who they are. Then we have a need to take action. And taking action, this involves agency. It involves imagining something, thinking, I wish I could do something. I'd like to do something creative. I have a dream to do something. And then to have a capacity to do it becomes really, really important. And then we have a need for security. We have a need for financial security, for emotional security, for health-related security, the basics, food, shelter, clothing, and a sense of security of who we are in relation to other people. And then we have a need for recognition. We have need for dignity, like human rights, and affording dignity and worth to people is part of this need for recognition. Having other people validate who you are and what you've done. And so for me then, to reflect back and say, why is this affecting me that I had to leave this organization? Not only was my meaning threatened, but my sense of connectedness, my sense of recognition, my capacity to do things, because I could do things through that institution, and my security, because all of a sudden I went from being part of something, and then left on my own. So at these levels of self-reflection and at the level of institutions coping with things, something like identity needs really helps understand what's going on. They're also linked to emotions, because when our meaning is threatened, we can become really angry at the injustice. When we lose a sense of connectedness, we're really sad and sometimes alienated. When our security is threatened, we're afraid. And when we're afraid and we can't do anything about it, we become really anxious and frustrated. When we can't take action, we feel depressed. And if that depression is linked then to an injustice, then we feel indignant and really, really frustrated. And then when our recognition is threatened, or it's negative recognition, we feel a sense of shame. So if people call us down for who we are, really rip into us, or criticize something that's really essential to us, we feel a sense of shame. And this happens individually, and it happens collectively. So when I've asked groups of people, okay, what's most important to you? Among Palestinians who haven't been recognized, who don't have their own country, they say recognition. And similarly, when I was in Taiwan, which is not recognized as a country by the international community, recognition is so important, because nobody, they're living in this unusual position where they as a people are not officially recognized. They can't be at the United Nations, for instance. And for individuals, this can be, and for children, for instance, who are called down, or people who are bullied, or people who are feel that everybody is against them. Recognizing the negative recognition control just how devastating that is. And on the other hand, when we have positive satisfiers for all of these, we have self-confidence, we have a sense of self-respect, self-esteem, and we see our place in the universe. We feel like we are important, and eventually we might have a sense of self-actualization, a sense of, hey, what we're doing is really significant. What we're doing is good. We're making a contribution. And so that's just one example of how something coming out of conflict studies can make a difference. If you do something that resonates with people, and it really does work to explain what's going on in conflict, it can make a really big difference. What we see in the future is a lot of very complex, challenges facing humanity. So if you think about global warming and the potential for system breakdown, if just a fraction of the predictions come true, we have one system affecting another system, affecting another system. So let's take the matter of rising sea levels. So if the oceans go up by 1 meter, we have millions and millions of people living close to the coastline. If you just take Bangladesh, for instance, which is a country with a very low elevation, there could be so many people that are moved out of their homes in fairly short order. Okay, where do they go? How do we deal with that? So when things become really, really scarce, like land, like housing, like food, people become desperate. And when people are desperate, it can lead to conflict. So if we make conflict management, and reconciliation, all these things, part of our emergency response skill base, then we look for where there might be potential conflicts, and we start to say, how do we put into processes to help people come together and talk about it and generate new ideas? So that's just one thing. So if you think about the amount of plastic in the oceans and the fact that fish stocks could go down rapidly very quickly, and we think about all the countries that rely on fish for food. If all of a sudden there are no more fish, what are they going to do for food? And that affects not only them getting nourishment, which is first and foremost and primary, but also their cultural tastes and what they value revolve around cooking fish. So the impact is huge and has multiple dimensions to it. And as fish stocks start to diminish, then you have huge conflicts over who's going to get the last remaining fish. And so these become international conflicts. And we know that one of the dynamics of Brexit even had to do with Europeans having access to the shoreline of Britain to fish, and so on. And we could go on with other dimensions of what's going on. Another key conflict area that's anticipated has to do with the Arctic Ocean, because as the Arctic Ocean melts, all of a sudden sea traffic becomes really quite viable. And we have all of the nations that border on the Atlantic Ocean are now trying to position themselves and prepare for getting their stake of what's going on. And this could very well involve conflict as well. Then another big area that doesn't have to do with global warming and is becoming even more and more complex has to do with the cyber world, the world of virtual reality and so on, and control over the cyber world and the malevolent use of this, coming up with malware or trying to hold people hostage through cutting off their or taking control of their computers and so on. This is another brand new area for conflict. So when we say, what does it matter? We have to look at these phenomena not only as things to be dealt with in their own right, as in trying to protect the environment and reduce global warming, but also to think about what are the potential conflict spin-offs and how do we prepare in advance to deal with the conflicts that could be emerging. Okay, so I mentioned very briefly about standing on the shoulders of giants, and I'll just make brief reference to a few authors and books. So first and foremost, I would mention René Girard. René Girard was a French-American author who discovered the concept of mimetic desire, and mimetic means imitation. So this means we imitate the desires of others, which means that we want what the next person has and the next person wants. And then he showed how conflict derives from this mimetic desire, because we can't always have what the next person wants. And so we have these rivalries. And when a community becomes chaotic because of an outburst of mimetic desire and people frustrated, they choose a scapegoat. And out of scapegoating comes sacrifice. And so the very origins of culture are linked to this aspect of who we are as human beings. So he's played a big role in my understandings. Another person currently who's made a huge impact has been Stuart Kauffman, who wrote a book, Reinventing the Sacred. He himself is a complexity scientist and a cell biologist, and he has unlocked a lot of the dimensions of what happens in a really complex situation, including the concept of emergent creativity. So in certain situations where there's so many moving parts and there's not a linear connection from one thing leading to another, but everything is interacting all the time. Within this situation, new things can emerge in a creative kind of way. And so I'm doing a lot of work and research on emergent creativity, and Stuart Kaufman has a key chapter in this book that I edited together with Gloria called Awakening, exploring spirituality, emergent creativity, and reconciliation. So those are just two authors that in the last few decades have played a really important role for me.